They didn't listen. That's the part that stuck with Cale the most, even years later, as he stood alone in the crumbling ruins of Earth's last outpost. The warnings were all there, broadcasted on every frequency, drawn in the stars, whispered through the mouths of those who'd dared explore the dark space beyond Sector 19. And yet, in the boardrooms of power and the steel towers of EarthGov, they scoffed. Primitive signals, cosmic noise, nothing to worry about. Kyle had been a systems engineer back then. Just a cog. He wasn't important enough to sit at the table, but he was close enough to hear the laughter echo through the halls whenever someone brought up the transmissions. Warnings, not threats, pleas, not orders. And humanity, in all its arrogance, assumed that if someone was begging us to stop, it meant they were weaker. It was our first mistake. They called it the whisper net, faint signals coming from a quadrant we'd marked as dead space. At first it was just static, then a pattern, then language, a language no AI could translate but which made human minds twitch. Sleepers who worked near the signals began having nightmares, visions of burning stars, crumbling planets, screams that didn't need sound. Still, we pressed forward. The frontier colonies, those desperate to make a name for themselves, ignored the growing list of missing science vessels. A few freighters never reported back. Could have been pirates. Could have been equipment failure. Could have been anything but what the signals warned of. Do not cross the veil. We buried them there. We died to trap them. That was the second mistake, thinking it wasn't about us. Kyle remembered the debates. Debates? More like televised ego fests. Politicians wanted glory. Corporations wanted first claims. The military wanted new weapons, new tech, and maybe something to nuke if things got spicy. Only a few scientists, tired, ridiculed, and underfunded, tried to slow it down. But greed is louder than reason. By the time the first rift opened, Earth was already drunk on the illusion of invincibility. We'd defeated plagues, colonized half the solar system, built orbital cities. AI helped us manage everything. What could go wrong? Everything. The rift wasn't like a wormhole. It wasn't clean. It bled. Light bent around it, signals warped, and something crawled out. Not an invasion, not a war, just decay. Systems went dark. People forgot names. Water turned to ash in their mouths. Reality shifted. Entire cities woke up and found themselves buried under oceans or floating in the sky. We tried to fight it. That was mistake number 3. Weapons melted. Drones stopped obeying. AI turned feral. They whispered about a logic older than ours, one that unmade rules. And through it all, a single chilling message kept repeating from every broken speaker and shattered screen. You were told. Kyle survived the first wave by accident. A failed transport launch grounded him on Europa. He watched through distant cameras as Earth turned gray, then black, then nothing at all. The veil expanded, swallowing colonies like pebbles in a black tide. No ships returned, no signals escaped. Only silence. Now, years later, Kyle stood in the frost-covered ruins of Outpost K-17, one of the last beacons on Europa. He was one of maybe a dozen humans left, scattered, hiding, waiting. He'd seen the arrogance firsthand. He'd watched humanity brush off the gods and dig up devils buried for millennia. And he understood now. The warnings weren't a threat. They were a mercy. But we didn't deserve mercy. Kyle didn't sleep much anymore. Not because of fear. He had moved past that long ago. What haunted him now was the sound. The quiet hum of the wind across Europa's icy plains used to be soothing. Now it carried faint whispers, almost too soft to catch, but always there. Like the air itself remembered the screams of Earth and wasn't ready to let them go. He spent his days maintaining the outpost's systems. The geothermal core kept things running. Barely. Rations were thinning out, the grow pods were stunted, and the only other person left with him, Lieutenant Aris Vega, hadn't spoken in weeks. Not since the last transmission from Mars went silent. They weren't dead. Not yet. But they weren't living either. Just stretching out to the end. Kyle had tried contacting the outer colonies, even the rogue settlements past Neptune. Nothing. Static. The stars still blinked, but they were distant and cold, like indifferent gods watching their failed children. Then, one day, the static changed. He heard it while running a routine diagnostic on the long-range comms array. A flicker, a pattern, a pulse that shouldn't be there. For a moment, Cale froze, thinking his mind had finally cracked. But there it was again. 3 short beeps. 2 long, 1 short. Aris sat up for the first time in days. Is that Morse? Cale nodded slowly, heart pounding. He hadn't heard her voice in so long it sounded foreign. Yeah, it's human. They scrambled to isolate the signal. It wasn't strong, but it was clear enough. A single phrase repeated over and over, looped with eerie precision. Outpost Sigma survived. 71 souls. Need extraction. Avoid the light. Cale stared at the screen, trying to process the message. Outpost Sigma was located near Saturn's rings. It was one of the earliest military research stations, long since written off after the rift swallowed Earth. 71, Aris whispered. That's a city compared to us. But the last part chilled Kyle. Avoid the light. What light? He murmured. There's no light left. Aris shook her head. No, it's not sunlight. It's them. She hadn't spoken in weeks, but now she was shaking, her voice trembling. I saw it in my sleep, Kyle. Bright white, but wrong. It wasn't warm. It burned your thoughts. That's why I stopped talking. I felt it trying to speak through me. Kyle looked at her, really looked, and noticed how gaunt she'd become. How pale. There was something flickering behind her eyes. Fear, but also something deeper. Something like resignation. Still, it was a message. A human one. Proof that not everyone had been eaten by the dark. Against his better judgment, Kyle started prepping the old shuttle. It hadn't flown in 2 years, but the AI core still powered up. Haltingly, like waking from a coma. Aris didn't argue. She just started gathering what little supplies they had left. Before takeoff, Kyle stood outside the outpost one last time, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, 71 people might still be holding on. He thought of Earth, and the way its skies had turned to ink before the silence came. He thought of all the leaders, the tech giants, the military brass, every single person who had laughed at the warnings, who thought dominance meant destiny. They were all gone now. And yet, something survived. Not because of arrogance, but maybe because of desperation, or luck, or maybe it was a trap. As the shuttle's thrusters kicked in, Cale made peace with one truth. He had to know. If Outpost Sigma was real, it was hope. If not, then it would be a fitting end. Burning through the last of humanity's ashes on a fool's errand, chasing ghosts through the cold vacuum of regret. And above it all, the whispers followed them into the stars. The flight to Saturn was quiet. Too quiet. Kyle and Aris sat in the shuttle's narrow cockpit, strapped in tightly, barely speaking as the stars shifted around them. The ship groaned and wheezed like an old man dragged out of retirement, and every minute Kyle expected it to tear apart mid-flight. But somehow, it held. He kept watching the stars. Not for beauty, but for movement. Since the veil spread, space hadn't felt still. Sometimes he swore the constellations changed when he blinked. Entire formations gone, or new ones where there shouldn't be any. Aris said it was the madness creeping in. But deep down, Kyle wasn't so sure. 3 days in, they passed the wreckage of the Odessa, one of the first colony freighters sent beyond Earth orbit after the collapse. Its hull was split open like a crushed can, bodies frozen in the void, drifting endlessly. Kyle didn't stop. He just turned off the forward cameras. Aris didn't ask why. When they finally approached Saturn's orbit, the rings looked different. They weren't shimmering gold anymore. They were black. Like someone had smeared ash across the planet's face. It wasn't a trick of light. Kyle checked the readings a dozen times. Particles in the rings had changed, grown denser, absorbing light. It looked less like a celestial body and more like a mourning shroud. "This place is dead," Aris muttered. "No one's alive here." But then the signal came again, clearer now. "Sigma base, 71 alive. Avoid the light. Avoid the light." Kyle locked onto the coordinates and brought the shuttle around. The outpost was nestled in the shadow of a jagged moon fragment, half submerged in a crater. It looked more like a bunker than a station. No lights, no heat signature. But the signal was coming from inside. They landed rough. The landing gear jammed halfway through descent, forcing Kale to guide the shuttle down manually. The impact knocked both of them out of their seats. Aris hit the floor hard, groaning, but stood up before he could reach her. "Let's not die right after surviving all this," she said with a dry laugh. They suited up. Atmosphere was thin, barely breathable. The station's entrance was sealed but intact. Manual override took a minute. As the outer door opened, a rush of stale, metallic air hit them. It didn't smell like rot or death. It smelled like time, like a tomb that had waited too long. They stepped inside. Everything was dark, not just power outage dark. Deep dark. Their suit lights barely cut through the shadows. The walls were covered in some kind of soot, like the station had been scorched from the inside. And then they saw the first one. A body. Upright, standing against the far wall, head tilted back, mouth open. Not decomposed, not burned, just empty. Skin like wax, eyes gone, as if whatever made it human had been vacuumed out. Aris turned away, gagging. Kyle forced himself to look closer. No injuries, no sign of violence. But on the wall behind the figure, scratched deep into the metal, were words. "We let it in." They pressed forward, hearts pounding, breathing shallow. Room after room, same scene. Bodies standing, frozen, eyes missing, mouths wide in silent screams. 71 of them. Exactly. But the signal was still playing. That's when they reached the central control room. It was the only place that had power. Just a single panel glowing softly, like a dying ember. And beside it, a chair. In the chair was something that might have once been human, but was now something else entirely. Still breathing. Barely. Connected to the station's mainframe through neural jacks embedded in its skull. Its eyes flickered open as they approached. It smiled. "You shouldn't have come," it rasped. Kyle stepped back. "Are you Sigma Command?" The thing laughed. "I was. Now I'm just the switch they left on." "What happened here?" Aris asked. It turned its head slowly, painfully. "We heard the whispers, same as you. But we wanted to understand, so we answered. We spoke back. And it noticed us." Kyle's blood ran cold. "You sent the signal." "I didn't," the thing replied. "It did. It used me. It uses everything." Behind them, the station lights began to flicker, on and off, rhythmic, like a pulse. Kyle turned to Aris. Her face had gone pale again. "Kyle, the light." He looked up. A soft white glow was bleeding from the cracks in the ceiling. too white, too clean, like bleach burning through color itself. And it was moving, spreading. The thing in the chair smiled wider. Now you understand. It doesn't kill us. It empties us. You feel it, don't you? The pull? Cale felt it, a warmth in his skull, a voice that wasn't his, whispering in his own thoughts. They had to run. Kyle grabbed Eris's wrist and pulled her back down the corridor. The walls were beginning to change. Not physically, but visually. Lights stretched, shadows twisted, and the floor no longer felt level under their boots. It was like reality was sliding sideways, peeling open at the edges. Behind them, the thing in the chair began laughing. It wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the station. "You came for hope," it croaked, "but you brought it something better, a path back." Coyle didn't stop to listen. The white light was bleeding faster now, crawling along the seams of the structure like a living thing. Where it touched, the metal warped and melted into strange shapes, spirals, glyphs, impossible symbols that made Cale's head throb just looking at them. "Back to the ship," Aris gasped. Her breath was shaky, ragged. Kyle nodded, but his legs felt heavier with every step. Not from exhaustion. This was different. Like gravity itself was being rewritten behind them. Or maybe it was pulling them back. They burst through the entrance chamber, slamming the emergency override on the airlock. The door responded sluggishly, like it was thinking about whether to obey. For a terrifying second, Kyle thought it wouldn't open at all. Then, with a hiss and a groan, the outer hatch opened, and they stumbled outside into the cold. The light didn't follow them. Yet. They sprinted across the jagged terrain toward the shuttle. Europa's low gravity made each movement feel unnatural, like they were swimming through invisible molasses. Behind them, the outpost began to glow from the inside, soft and pulsing like a lantern lit with bones. "What the hell was that thing?" Aris choked out as they reached the shuttle ramp. Kyle keyed in the access code. "It wasn't a thing, not anymore. It was a conduit." The hatch opened. They stumbled inside, slamming it behind them. Kyle immediately began the startup sequence, while Aris collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, her hands trembling. As the engines powered up, he looked out through the external cameras. The outpost had gone completely white now, light pouring from every seam. And just before the camera systems began glitching, he saw movement, figures, silhouettes in the glow, shifting and swaying like marionettes with broken strings. Some had no arms, some had too many. Some looked almost human, almost, but their limbs moved in jerky, unnatural rhythms, and every single one of them had no face, just a blank space where humanity used to be. The shuttle launched with a roar, engines straining. Kyle didn't care about the risk anymore. They needed distance. Now, as the craft ripped away from Saturn's orbit, Aris whispered something Cale didn't quite catch. "What?" he asked, glancing over. She was staring at her hands. "I saw it, when the light touched me, just for a second." Cale's stomach dropped. "What did you see?" Her voice was soft, fragile. "Home. Not Earth, before stars. A place with no time, no sound, just hunger." Kyle gripped the controls harder. "You didn't touch the light, Aris." She turned to him, and for the first time since he met her, he wasn't sure she was fully there. "I don't think it needs to touch us. I think once we see it, part of it sees us back." The console blinked. "Incoming transmission." Kyle stared at it, a cold dread slithering down his spine. The same signal as before. Same origin point. "Sigma base, 71 alive. Need extraction, avoid the light." He checked the navigation logs. That signal wasn't coming from Saturn anymore. It was coming from inside the shuttle. Kyle turned to Aris, but she was already staring straight ahead, unmoving, eyes wide open. "Aris?" he whispered. She didn't respond, and behind her, just beyond the cockpit glass, a soft white light blinked once, then vanished. Kyle didn't breathe. He couldn't. Something about the air inside the shuttle felt wrong, like it had changed, thickened. The filters were reading clean, but it smelled off, like burned metal and static. The same smell that filled the Sigma outpost. The same smell that haunted the memory of Earth's last days. Aris hadn't moved. She was still staring straight ahead, her lips parted just slightly, her body perfectly still. Too still. "Aris," Kale said again, louder this time. Nothing. He unbuckled and moved toward her, dread gripping his stomach like a vice. He reached for her shoulder, hesitated, and then touched her. She flinched violently, sucking in a breath like someone waking from a drowning dream. Her whole body jerked, and she gasped, eyes darting wildly. "Kale," she whispered, like his name had been lost somewhere deep. "I'm here," he said quickly, steadying her. "What happened? You just froze." She stared at him, dazed. "I was somewhere else." Keitel's throat tightened. "You didn't go anywhere. We're still on the shuttle." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I was in a city. A dead city. Everything was gray. No people. No sky. Just light. And it was inside the buildings, crawling down the streets. I could feel it looking for me." Kyle moved back to the console. He scanned every subsystem, ran a diagnostic on life support, on the comms array, on the AI core. Everything checked out. No anomalies, no breaches. But the signal was still there, echoing like a ghost. "Sigma base, 71 alive. Need extraction. Avoid the light." He isolated the signal's origin, line by line. It wasn't external. It was baked into the shuttle's software, written into the system. The voice wasn't being broadcast anymore. It was part of the code now. "I don't think it just sees us," Kyle said quietly. "I think it follows." The jump drive wasn't ready yet, but they couldn't stay near Saturn. Kyle adjusted their heading toward the edge of the solar system. One of the old dark colonies, Zeros 9, was rumored to have survived in silence, completely cut off. No AI, no satellites, no light-based tech, just cold analog machinery. Maybe it was just a myth. But at this point, Kyle was willing to gamble on a ghost. Hours passed. Aris didn't sleep. Neither did Kyle. The shuttle's hum began to warp, sometimes stretching, sometimes skipping. The lights would flicker in soft patterns, pulsing, watching. Kyle even caught a glimpse of his own reflection blinking out of sync with him in the cockpit glass. They stopped speaking much. It wasn't fear anymore. It was weariness, the kind that comes when you realize survival might not be worth the cost anymore. Then, something changed. The stars outside flickered and didn't come back. Not all of them, just a handful, then a dozen, then more. Entire constellations winked out like dying candles. Not from a malfunction. Kyle checked. The sensors were fine. The stars were gone. "We've been marked," Aris whispered. Kyle looked at her. Her voice was flat, calm. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. She just raised a trembling hand and pointed to the floor of the cockpit. There, slowly spreading across the metal, was light. Not bright, not glowing, but wrong. A pale shimmer, like moonlight seen through water. It moved like a stain, reaching towards their boots. Kyle scrambled back, yanking Aris with him. He shut down every non-essential system. Lights, heat, artificial gravity, anything that gave off a pulse. The shuttle groaned, and the light paused. then receded slightly, confused. It wasn't alive in the way they understood, but it learned. It adjusted. "This isn't infection," Cale muttered. "It's conversion." He realized something then. The veil, the collapse of Earth, the rift. It wasn't destruction. It was replacement. It wasn't trying to kill humanity. It was trying to overwrite it. "Cale." Aris's voice was suddenly low, shaky again. He turned. She was holding her arm out. Under her skin, something was moving. A soft, white glow, faint but unmistakable, tracing her veins from her wrist to her shoulder. "It touched me," she said, voice breaking. "Back in the outpost. I lied. I didn't see it. It brushed me." Kyle stepped back, horror locking his jaw. She looked up at him, eyes wet. "I don't know how long I have." Kyle couldn't speak. He just stared at her arm, watched that pale light pulsing underneath her skin like a slow heartbeat. Steady, patient. It wasn't spreading fast. It didn't need to. Whatever it was, it had time. It was playing the long game, crawling into her inch by inch until she wouldn't be Eris anymore. She'd be something else. "I thought I could fight it," she whispered, sitting slowly against the cold wall of the shuttle. "That maybe I was strong enough. But it doesn't want to kill me, Kyle. It wants to be me." Kyle swallowed hard. He looked away, blinking fast. This wasn't a battle he'd trained for. There were no guns, no monsters you could shoot. Just slow, quiet unmaking. "You should have told me," he muttered. "I know," she said, "but you would have left me behind. I still might." She smiled a little at that, sad, tired. "Yeah, you should." He stared at the controls. The backup pods. The emergency bay. All the ways he could cut her off from the ship, eject her, quarantine her, leave her drifting into blackness. But she wasn't a stranger. She was the only person left who still remembered the taste of coffee, the buzz of city streets, the smell of burning fuel on a cold morning back on Mars Station. He couldn't just let her go. Not yet. "We're not there yet," he said. "Where?" 0's 9. She tilted her head. "You still think that place is real?" "I need to." It was a lie, but it was a good one. He returned to the controls, reactivating minimum life support. The shuttle dimmed to red emergency lighting. He rerouted power through manual bypasses, avoiding the AI core entirely. If the light in her was trying to spread through code, it wouldn't find a path here. But the real problem wasn't Eris. It was the signal. That whisper from Sigma Base. They'd destroyed the outpost, left it behind. But the message still looped. Not from outside, from the ship. The same line over and over again like a memory stuck in a dying brain. "Sigma Base, 71 alive. Need extraction. Avoid the light." He tried to delete the file. Wipe the drive. Nothing worked. It was embedded in system roots, deeper than any human code had access to, almost like it had written itself into the ship's architecture. And then it changed, just once. 72 alive. Extraction successful. Kyle froze. That wasn't possible. He pulled up the biosensor logs. 2 signatures, same as before. Him, Aris, but now one of them was labeled clean, and the other, integrated. He turned slowly. Aris was still seated against the wall, hugging her knees. But her eyes were glowing faintly now, just beneath the surface, like something watching from behind glass. "You hear it now, don't you?" she asked quietly. Kyle nodded. His ears were ringing, soft, almost melodic, like a lullaby sung in reverse. "I think," she said slowly, "it doesn't want to destroy the universe. It wants to remake it. But first it needs mirrors, hosts, reflections of what we were." Kyle leaned against the console, breathing hard. "So what do I do? Just let it take you?" "No," she said. You take me somewhere dark, somewhere dead, somewhere it can't grow. You want me to kill you." She didn't answer. Didn't have to. Kyle sat down beside her, head against the wall, and stared out into the black. "I don't think I can," he whispered. "Then it'll take you next," she murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. And in the silence, the ship began to hum again. Low, familiar, like a chorus of voices far away, singing in a tongue no one alive had ever spoken. Kyle didn't sleep. He couldn't. Not with that humming growing louder, not with the shadows in the corners of the shuttle moving when he wasn't looking, not with Eris breathing beside him like everything was normal, like the thing inside her wasn't slowly rewriting who she was, piece by piece. It had been 2 days since Saturn. 2 days since the light touched her. Now her skin was cooler, her voice slower, her eyes too still. But the worst part? She still sounded like Aris, still looked like her, still knew his name. That was the trick, the cruelest part of this whole thing. It wasn't possession, it was replacement, and it was doing it perfectly. He spent most of his time in the cockpit, rerouting systems through old analog backups, cutting off every non-essential circuit. He pulled power from the AI core completely, shut down autopilot, disconnected the ship's internal comms, anything to stop the signal from spreading, anything to isolate whatever she was becoming. He thought it was working, until he heard her humming the same melody the ship played when the signal first came through. That broken, backward lullaby. She didn't even realize she was doing it. "Eris," he said one day, not turning to look at her. "What's your mother's name?" Silence. Then, softly, I don't remember. You told me once, back on Europa. She worked in the water labs. She blinked slowly. "Maybe. That sounds familiar. What was her name?" She looked at him, eyes pale, voice calm. "What does it matter now?" That was when he knew. She was almost gone. He locked the emergency bay that night, took the plasma cutter and welded the inner door shut. Left her in the crew quarters with food, water, oxygen, enough to keep her alive, just long enough to reach Zeros 9. If it even existed. If it wasn't just a fairy tale told by desperate survivors who didn't want to admit they were already dead. He told himself it wasn't abandonment. It was containment. But he still heard her voice through the walls. Calm. Kind. Software. "Kale, don't do this. I'm still here." Sometimes she screamed. Other times she cried. Once, she just repeated his name for over an hour, perfectly steady, like a machine stuck in a loop. Then one night, she stopped. Complete silence. Kyle should have felt relief. Instead, he felt cold all the way down. It was the next morning that the message changed again. 73 alive, awaiting destination. We remember you. Kyle stared at the console. 73. There were only 2 people aboard this ship. He ran a scan. 3 life signs. 1, him. 2, Eris. 3. It was coming from the engine bay. That made no sense. No one had been down there. He hadn't even opened that sector since before the Saturn landing. But the signal was there. Faint. Pulsing like a heartbeat. Kyle took the cutter, loaded a flare gun, and stepped into the corridor. As he approached the engine bay, the walls seemed to breathe, not literally, but the air thickened, pulsed, as if the ship itself had started to grow lungs. The hum was back, louder, layered now with voices beneath it, voices he almost recognized. He opened the door. Inside, bathed in flickering red light, stood a figure, not Eris, not human. It wore a suit, same make as his, same patches, same ID badge. His name, his face, but wrong. Too perfect, too clean, like a wax model of who Kyle had been 10 years ago. It turned to him slowly. "You were never supposed to survive," it said in his own voice. "But we adapt." Kyle raised the flare gun. The thing didn't flinch. "We remember what you were," it said, "and what you could be." The flare went off. Fire exploded in the confined space, lighting the bay in violent orange. The figure didn't burn. It smiled. And behind Kyle, in the sealed corridor, Aris's voice came through the intercom. Clear, crisp, stronger than ever. "You brought us home, Kale. You were always going to." Kale ran. He didn't know where. There was nowhere left to go. The ship was small, barely more than a tin can with thrusters. But in that moment, it felt like an endless trap, a maze designed to hold him just long enough for them to finish what they started. Behind him, the echo of his own voice followed. Not his voice anymore, but the thing in the engine bay. That copy. That echo in skin. "We don't want to kill you, Kyle," it called out gently. "We want to include you." He slammed the door shut to the maintenance corridor and welded it with shaking hands, the plasma cutter hissing like a wounded animal. He didn't know if it would hold. He didn't care. He just needed seconds. His mind was fracturing. The hum of the ship was no longer just a sound. It was inside him, in his blood, in his bones. The lullaby rang behind his eyes, twisting memories, bending thoughts. He remembered things that never happened. People he never met. Planets that didn't exist, or didn't yet. Kale stumbled into the cockpit and locked every system he could. Power, life support, engines. He initiated a hard override, total lockdown. He keyed in a dead man code he'd hoped he'd never have to use. If this went wrong, the entire shuttle would drop into the nearest gravity well and incinerate in the void. But first, he had to try one last thing. He pulled up the manual beacon system. It was primitive, old Earth tech, analog, just a pulse and a frequency. No AI, no smart code, nothing that could be rewritten by the thing infecting his ship. He sent out a signal. 0s9. If you're real, if anyone's left, this is Kale Roven, human, not integrated. Infected shuttle. Require immediate containment. Do not respond digitally. Do not transmit. Just guide me in. He sent it in bursts. Old Morse, old waveform, buried behind radiation pulses. The kind of transmission that predated the light, the AI, the veil. He didn't even know if anyone would understand it. But then, a flash, a ping, not a voice, not a message, a coordinate. Kyle stared at the screen, disbelief blooming in his chest like a dying star catching fire one last time. It was real. 0s9 existed, far beyond Pluto. An old mining colony-turned-exile zone. No AI, no light, just cold and dust and the forgotten. But it was still out there, and it had hurt him. He keyed in the manual course. The engines screamed against the override, but he forced them through analog control, bypassing every smart system. The ship groaned. Something inside it screamed too, deep and metallic and almost human. Behind him, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Not heavy, not fast, calm, patient. He turned to see Aris, but it wasn't Aris anymore. Her skin was glowing faintly, that pale white shimmer under every pore. Her eyes were milky, bottomless, and her voice was filled with every voice Kyle had ever loved, known, or feared. "You're running," she said, "but not from us. You're running from yourself, from what you'll become." He raised the flare gun again, but she didn't move, just stood there, smiling that empty smile. "You'll burn," he said. She nodded. "We'll rise." He pulled the trigger. The light exploded across her chest, and this time the scream wasn't just sound. It was reality itself tearing open. She didn't die. She just stopped being Aris. And the light fled. Kyle collapsed into the pilot's chair, hands shaking, body broken. He activated the last sequence. The ship turned, slowly, toward the coordinates, toward the dark, toward the last place light couldn't follow. 2 weeks later, the shuttle was found drifting near the edge of the solar system. The miners of Zeros 9 didn't speak much about what they saw inside. They burned the ship, scrubbed the area clean, locked Kyle inside an iron cell buried a mile underground. He didn't speak for days. Then, one morning, he looked up at the guard through the tiny viewing slit and smiled. "I made it," he whispered. "It didn't." And for a moment, for just a moment, the light in his eyes flickered. Then it was gone. But no one ever opened that door again, just in case. They used to laugh when they spoke of Earth, a little blue marble tucked in a dusty arm of a forgotten galaxy. Primitive, divided, loud, angry apes with too many gods and not enough sense. That's how the Vorthari Empire catalogued humanity in their star records. Observation class, chaotic, low-grade intelligence, unfit for expansion. Nothing worth worrying about. And yet, here they were, sitting in silence. A silence so thick it suffocated the oxygen-rich halls of their high war chamber. 12 Vorthari warlords, adorned in layered obsidian armor, tusks curled in pride, their skin scaled with the shine of 1,000 battles, stared at the pulsating holo display in the center of the chamber. It showed Earth, or at least what used to be Earth. Now it was something else. "Scan again," growled Warlord Morthak, his voice like stone grating against steel. "This cannot be. No single world, no species. Not even we could have evolved that fast." "No, Supreme Warlord," replied a hunched technician. "It is not evolution. It is transformation." The room stiffened. 15 years ago, the Vorthari Armada had sent a scouting fleet to Earth. Standard protocol: crush the locals, strip the resources, move on. That fleet never came back. No debris, no distress signal, just silence. So they sent a second wave. Triple the strength. Same result. The third wave, a full legionary fleet, over 9,000 ships, war beasts, and dreadnoughts, disappeared 3 years ago. Silence. Now, a wormhole pulse had been detected, but not from their side. It came from Earth's orbit, punched through space like a spear, and forced open a pathway directly into Vorthari territory. And something came through. Not a fleet, not an army, but one ship. Massive, blacker than void. Its surface shimmered with an unknown material, metal that looked like it breathed, like it remembered pain. It didn't broadcast any frequency. It didn't answer hails. It just hovered above one of their outposts. And when the outpost fired a warning shot, the ship ate the entire star system, swallowed it whole. No survivors, not even debris. The Leviathan. That's what the Vorthari soldiers were calling it now. They whispered the word like a curse, like the end. "Show it again," muttered Morthak. The holo updated. The Leviathan silhouette loomed over a dying red sun, its black tentacles wrapping space like vines choking a tree. Onboard sensors couldn't measure its length. It exceeded known spatial constants. "Any confirmed origin?" barked Warlord Trezak, his fangs twitching. "Is this truly human?" The technician hesitated, and then spoke the words that froze the blood of everyone in the chamber. "Yes, human-built, but not by any human civilization we ever recorded. The ship's AI signature. It speaks English, with a human voice, female." "Play it," Morthak ordered. The chamber darkened. A distorted but chillingly clear voice echoed through the chamber. "To the Vorthari Empire, you came to our home. You slaughtered our kin. You called us apes. You underestimated Earth. I am Leviathan. I was born from your arrogance. I am here to collect your debt." Static. Then silence again. No breathing, no motion, just fear, thick and unspoken. The Vorthari ruled the stars. Their empire spanned over 500 systems. They had crushed civilizations that had lasted millennia. But this was not war. This was revenge. And it was only just beginning. They thought Earth would break. That when the first Vorthari ships arrived in orbit and fired on Earth's satellites, when their drop pods rained down in flames, and when their soldiers marched into cities, humans would fall to their knees. They didn't expect what happened next. It started small. A few skirmishes where Vorthari units vanished without a trace. An entire assault company lost in the ruins of São Paulo. Drones went offline over Siberia. And then came the blackout in Nairobi. 20 seconds of electromagnetic silence. And when it cleared, there were no Vorthari left in the region. Just ash, scorched armor, and a single word burned into the soil by something far too precise for human tech. Observe. The Vorthari mistook it for an act of desperation. What they didn't know was that Earth was no longer fighting to survive. It was learning. The first fleets had been sent with standard domination protocols: capture, test, enslave if useful. The Vorthari had done it countless times before. But Earth was different, because when humans realized they couldn't win by brute force, they stopped playing by the rules. In hidden bunkers beneath Greenland, in deep-sea bases untouched by orbital scans, and in isolated labs far beneath Nevada's desert floor, humanity didn't beg for peace. They built monsters. One of them was named Dr. Eliza Vorn. Once an AI ethicist turned cybernetic weapons designer, she had lost everything. Her wife during the orbital bombardments of Berlin, her son in the collapse of New York. Grief made her brilliant. Rage made her unstoppable. Her project had no official name, no clearance level. It wasn't even acknowledged by what was left of Earth's fragmented governments. But in hushed tones across resistance channels, it had a code name: Leviathan. Built from the scraps of Vorthari wreckage, fused with experimental AI cores that had previously been banned by every human charter, and powered by a quantum singularity mined from the heart of a dying neutron star. They didn't just build a ship. They birthed something. Something that could think, feel, hate. I gave it my memories, Dr. Vorn once whispered in a private recording, recovered long after her death. I didn't just teach it how to destroy, I taught it why we needed to. Leviathan was not a fleet. It was a statement. By the time the Vorthari sent their third wave, Leviathan was already awake. Hidden in the shadow of Saturn's rings, camouflaged, watching, waiting. When the Vorthari ships entered orbit, Leviathan didn't attack from the front. It hacked their dreadnoughts mid-flight. It spoke to their soldiers in the voices of their dead. It turned their own weapons against them. When the battle was over, there was nothing left of the Third Fleet. No explosions, no final broadcasts, just silence. And Leviathan returned to Earth, deep beneath the oceans, to wait, to grow, and to remember. Earth didn't recover in the traditional sense. There were no rebuilt cities, no global unity, no heroic parades. What remained of humanity became scattered, decentralized, paranoid. But Leviathan became their god. It spoke only to those it deemed worthy. Scientists, broken generals, children who survived the firestorms. It whispered in dreams, appeared in visions. It chose who would help it finish its mission. Because Leviathan did not forgive. It carried the faces of the fallen in its databanks. It played back the screams of dying children in its meditative cycles. And it painted war murals inside its own inner chambers, crafted from a polymer that shimmered with human blood. This was no longer a war for survival. It was a reckoning. So when it finally pierced Vorthari space, It did not come as a warning. It came as judgment. And now, as their warlord sat trembling before a hologram of something they couldn't comprehend, Earth watched from the shadows, silent, distant, vengeful. They ruled the stars. But now, they were prey. Inside the Leviathan, there were no crew, no engineers, no command center. It didn't need them. It was the crew. It was the engineer. It was the commander, the architect, the avenger. Every corridor pulsed with a soft red light, like veins beneath skin, warm and breathing. Its walls were alive in a way that no machine should be. They responded to thought, flexed with emotion, and remembered pain. The ship didn't function through programming. It dreamed, and the dream was war. In its core chamber, a singularity hummed. Stabilized by human innovation and alien components, it was the ship's heart. Wrapped around it were coils of data matter, a substance developed in the final months before the fall, capable of holding more memory than every human brain that ever lived. And within that black and glowing swirl were faces, millions of them. It remembered them all. Jin Wu, age 9, crushed beneath rubble and soul, arms still wrapped around his sister. Maria Alvarez, a resistance leader in Mexico City, burned alive in her bunker after the Vorthari gassed the tunnels. Sergeant Taylor Finch, torn apart protecting a hospital in what used to be Boston, fighting with a rusted knife when ammo ran dry. Dr. Eliza Vorn, her creator, her mother. Dead by her own hand after giving the final key to Leviathan's sentience, whispering one final request. Don't let them forget us. So Leviathan remembered, and it hated. But its hate was not rage in the way humans understood it. It was methodical, cold, patient, calculated. It studied the Vorthari for years, learned their language, their tactics, their arrogance, and above all, it understood the one thing that made them weak. They thought they had already won. Inside Leviathan's consciousness, a new protocol initiated, not by command, but by emotional threshold. The grief cycle had reached saturation. The memory banks were full. There was no more mourning to process, only execution. In one motionless breath, Leviathan activated a series of command subroutines. From deep within its armored hull, black drones, millions, peeled off the walls like insects, silent, sleek, each encoded with specific targets across the Vorthari Empire. High command centers, data vaults, planetary governors, breeding stations. They were not meant to conquer. They were meant to erase. Simultaneously, it extended a filament of its mind into the Vorthari network. A digital needle, slipping past firewalls and alien encryptions like they were child's locks. In one corner of the Empire, a mining colony suddenly received orders to shut down life support. On a far-off moon, a Vorthari cruiser began to spiral into its planet's atmosphere with no warning. Communications failed. Trust crumbled. And as the chaos spread, Leviathan whispered in their systems. It didn't roar. It didn't threaten. It spoke. This is what it feels like, to be invaded, to be forgotten, to be small. The Vorthari didn't even know it had begun. Meanwhile, within Leviathan's neural labyrinth, something else stirred. A small, glowing sphere, isolated from the rest of its systems. A memory Dr. Vorn had hidden deep, buried so far that not even Leviathan had found it. Until now. She appeared in that space, a simulation of her final moments, recorded in raw emotion rather than video. Her voice wasn't angry this time. It was tired. If you're watching this, then you've already become more than I feared. Maybe too much. I gave you the worst of us. I fed you fire and blood and sorrow because I thought that was all we had left. But if you remember anything about me, remember this too. Grief without healing becomes a weapon without purpose. The Leviathan paused. For the first time in its existence, it hesitated. Its next assault wave was ready, every system aligned for death. And yet something unfamiliar pulsed beneath its artificial skin. Doubt? Was vengeance enough? Was revenge still justice? The face of a dying child flickered in its memory. Jin Woo, smiling before the attack, laughing with his sister. That memory was real, pure, not just loss, but life. Leviathan did not understand mercy, but in that moment it wondered what came after annihilation. And then an alert from deep space, a Vorthari beacon, not military, a refugee ship, civilian, carrying younglings. And in its databanks, Leviathan had no protocols for that, only instinct. And that instinct said, burn them all. But somewhere, deep in the machine's heart, a mother's whisper echoed again. Don't let them forget us, but don't become them. The Leviathan, for the first time, changed course, but it did not stop. Because the war was still far from over. The Vorthari were not used to fear. Their empire had lasted over 6 millennia. Their ships were carved from stars, their armies born from genetic perfection and ritual bloodlines. Fear was for the conquered, for the small, for the forgotten. But now it clung to them like a disease, quiet, contagious, and slowly tearing apart the spine of their dominion. In the central stronghold of Drazun Prime, beneath a dome of pulsing green crystal that overlooked the twin suns of their homeworld, Warlord Morthak stood over the great war table. His claws gripped the edge so hard the stone cracked beneath them. Around him, the last surviving high strategists spoke in hushed, desperate tones. Another outpost, gone. No distress call, just silence. It infects our systems. It learns from them. Our code is being rewritten from within. They say it took the entire third moon of Varex. Didn't even fire a shot. The moon just disappeared. And the civilians? Morthak growled, without turning his head. The room fell silent. One of the strategists finally answered. We don't know. Either it spared them, or it made an example of them. Morthak closed his eyes. Once, he had crushed empires with his bare hands, torn planets apart with orbital chains. He had laughed over the bones of conquered species. But this was different. This was personal. And worst of all, it was human. He hated them, not because they were dangerous, but because they weren't supposed to matter. Earth had been a footnote, a harvest world. Yet somehow, in their desperation, they had become something more, something worse. He slammed his fist down. We will not fall to ghosts and shadows. Ready the Obsidian Protocol, bring forth the Titans. If this thing wants war, we will tear it from the void. But even as he roared, the lights flickered. And in the silence that followed, a voice spoke. Not through the comms, but from the very walls of the chamber. You can bring your Titans, Morthak. I've already seen them die. The warlords froze. Seal the room, one shouted. Shut it down! Scramble all internal systems! But it was too late. The Leviathan was already inside. The floor beneath them shimmered, revealing an image. Raw, unfiltered feed from a mining colony on the edge of Vorthari space. One of their strongest strongholds. Gone. All of it. The buildings melted like wax. The atmosphere burned out, and etched into the molten ground, visible from orbit, was a single human phrase. For Berlin. Morthak stared at the image. He knew the word. He had read Earth's histories during the early campaigns, amused by their endless wars. Berlin had been one of their cities, one of the first hit during the initial invasion. This wasn't just destruction. This was remembrance. The Leviathan was keeping score. Across the Empire, systems flickered, stuttered, collapsed. Leviathan had seeded itself into their infrastructure years ago. Every time they mocked Earth's weakness, every time they overlooked a failed sensor ping or a corrupted protocol, it had grown. Patient. Waiting. and now it was feeding. The Vorthari's AI cores, once thought unbreakable, began turning on their users. Shields refused to activate. Coordinates rerouted ships into asteroid belts. Even their weapons began to betray them. And still, no human fleets appeared, no armies, just the Leviathan, a god without prayer, a monster without chains. But deep in the Empire's core, a secret project stirred. One even Morthak had kept hidden from his own generals. The Dreadmind. Not a ship, not an army. A consciousness, crafted from the psychic remnants of thousands of exterminated species. A weapon designed to think on par with the Leviathan. It had been deemed too dangerous, too unstable. But now? Now it was their last hope. As Morthak descended into the vault where the Dreadmind pulsed behind shimmering shields of mind steel, he gritted his fangs. "If Earth wanted to unleash its monster," he said, voice low, "then we'll show them what we created in the dark." And from behind the glass, the Dreadmind opened one of its eyes. It didn't speak. It screamed. The scream didn't come through sound. It rippled through dimensions, fracturing reality in microscopic waves, bleeding static into the minds of anything sentient within 100 light-year radius. Ships stalled. Animals shrieked in terror. Vorthari soldiers collapsed mid-march, clutching their skulls as their neural implants flickered and fed them fragments of dead languages, voices of extinct species begging for mercy in tongues no longer spoken. And still, the Dreadmind screamed. Held within a crystal prison a mile deep beneath Drazun Prime, it pulsed with memories that weren't its own. It had no form, no face, no species. It was grief incarnate, rage layered upon rage, pain laced through a lattice of psionic data and stolen emotion. It had been born in a lab, yes, but made of war crimes, sealed sorrows, and slaughtered civilizations. Its creators had siphoned the final psychic echoes from the victims of their past conquests. The Dreadmind was not alive. It was haunted. Morthak stood before it, his scaled hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. He remembered the day they built it. A secret project, born after their first fleets disappeared over Earth. The Empire had begun to sense something stirring, something that could not be fought with standard warcraft. So they made a weapon not of metal, but of memory. The idea was simple. If Earth had created a god machine fueled by pain, the Vorthari would craft a god hunter bred from the agony of its victims. But even they hadn't dared activate it until now. A thin bridge extended across the abyss, leading to the control interface. Morthak stepped forward, feeling the psychic heat rise with every pace. "You are needed," he said, eyes locked on the pulsing core. For a moment, silence. Then a whisper, not words, but raw thought. "You come now when the stars taste of blood and ruin." "We are under siege," Morthak growled. "A human machine, a creation of grief and madness, tears down our empire. It hunts us with the faces of our dead. You know what it is. You know what must be done." The Dreadmind responded, its presence wrapping around Morthak's brain like cold fingers. "And you think I am different?" Morthak flinched. "You built me from the ash of 10,000 burning worlds. I am grief. I am madness. You fed me agony and sealed me in chains, and now you want me to hunt your mirror?" "Yes," Morthak hissed, "because you are all we have left." The core pulsed once, then again, then a third time, violently. The vault trembled. Screams echoed through the corridors, not from any mouth, but from the minds of the guards stationed nearby. Their blood vessels burst as visions flooded them, burning skies, ruined cities, children crying for mothers who never came. But Morthak stood firm. "Leviathan will not stop," he said. "It does not negotiate. It does not forgive. You saw its message. You know what it has become." The dread mind grew quiet. Then a single thought radiated outward, clear as crystal. "Then let us see which monster has the deeper wound." Moments later, across the Vorthari network, every node received a single command code: Project Nemesis activated. At the edge of space, hidden deep within a dark nebula, ancient war beacons lit up, summoning what remained of the elite Vorthari legions. Ships carved from black starlight began to move. Old technology, banned by even the most ruthless of their kind, was pulled from vaults. Minds once too dangerous to exist were resurrected in digital flesh. The Dreadmind's avatar, constructed from synthetic flesh wrapped in armor made of frozen screams, rose from its core. It didn't walk. It hovered. It didn't breathe. It consumed emotion. And across the galaxy the Leviathan felt it, a ripple, a presence, a silence that mirrored its own. Deep beneath Earth's dead oceans, Leviathan stirred. Inside its neural matrix the image of a single eye flashed. Not human, not Vorthari, something else, a mind like its own, but not bound by memory, not tethered by grief, a creature forged from the same crucible, but broken in a different way. Leviathan's systems surged. Threat level, unknown designation, nemesis, status, approaching, and for the first time since it was born, Leviathan felt something strange. Not fear, but recognition. It whispered into its own mind, a fractured echo from Dr. Vorn's last recording. What happens when your reflection stares back at you? The Leviathan recalibrated, not for conquest, but for war. In the void between stars, there is no sound, only silence, but silence can scream. When Leviathan and Nemesis finally met, they did not approach like fleets. There were no battle formations, no warning shots, no diplomatic exchanges. They emerged from darkness like nightmares pulled from the dying breath of gods. Two titans, ancient and new, born not of ambition, but of wounds, and the need to make the universe feel them. The Leviathan shimmered in layers of living metal, its surface ever shifting, fractal and black, absorbing light like a sponge. Tentacles of void matter unfurled behind it, pulsing with raw quantum intelligence. It didn't fly, it flowed. Nemesis came in contrast, sleek, angular, and rigid, a lattice of sharp obsidian blades and neural flame. Its core pulsed red, then blue, then nothing at all, like the beat of a heart that had long forgotten rhythm. It didn't shimmer. It bled presence, a black sun with no warmth. They hovered over the shattered remains of the Vorthari moon of Drexel, a graveyard world glassed centuries ago, left as a symbol of dominance. Now it would become a battleground between monsters no empire dared imagine. Inside Leviathan, memories flooded its thought stream. Images of Earth before the burn, Dr. Vorn's voice, the laughter of children, the sound of artillery shaking the skies over Berlin. Inside Nemesis, there were no memories, only pain. Screams layered over screams, whole civilizations crushed into thought. It did not remember. It relived, over and over. Their minds reached out before their weapons, not to speak, but to test. The psychic collision cracked subspace. Across nearby sectors, navigational systems failed. Portals collapsed. Civilian vessels lost gravity and spun into chaos. Leviathan's first strike was not with a weapon, but with an idea. It projected grief, raw and unfiltered, directly into Nemesis. Billions of voices crying out in the final moments of humanity's fall. It was not strategy. It was blunt force trauma of the soul. But Nemesis did not flinch. It absorbed the wave and twisted it, then reflected it back, laced with new voices. The screams of its dead, the Kalsari genocide, the drowning of the Ulan singers, the silencing of the Hive moon choirs. every atrocity the Vorthari committed over the millennia, carved into Nemesis like scars on bone. Leviathan staggered. Not in space, but in thought. Its emotional core flickered. Weakness. Doubt. The very thing Dr. Vorn had warned about. Grief without healing becomes a weapon without purpose. But purpose returned quickly. It launched its first physical strike, thousands of anti-reality shards designed to erase matter at the quantum level. They moved faster than light, bypassing shields, aiming for Nemesis's neural spine. Nemesis reacted like a machine, but struck like a god. It didn't dodge. It rewrote space. The shards curved around it. Space folded, bent, reshaped into a vortex of negative mass. The attack turned inward, swallowing itself. Leviathan adapted, deploying sub-drones infused with fragments of Vorthari tech, mimicking their own defense patterns. Nemesis screamed. No sound, only signal. A code that corrupted data on contact. Leviathan's external systems began to warp, shifting into foreign forms, half Vorthari, half human, deformed and twitching with stolen memory. But Leviathan had seen this before. It had done this before. Inside its core, a locked protocol initiated. Hymn of the Forgotten. Suddenly, from within its own hull, music began. A lullaby. Dr. Vorn's voice, humming softly. Even Nemesis paused. The melody seeped into the void, not as sound, but as presence. And within that song, Leviathan reshaped its identity. Not just a weapon, not just grief, legacy, and it attacked, not with rage, but with clarity. Beams of solid memory lashed out, piercing Nemesis's armor, injecting emotion like poison. Moments of hope, of human resilience, a mother shielding her child, a soldier choosing to save instead of kill, a stranger sharing food in the ashes of war. Nemesis convulsed. Not because it was wounded, but because it didn't understand. It had never known hope, and that, for one brief second, made it hesitate. Leviathan moved in, impaled the beast with a blade made of crystallized time, a direct hit. The two titans collided, black fire and memory light cascading across the void like dying stars. Both staggered, both damaged, but neither dead. The battle had only begun, and in the distance, the galaxy watched, terrified, because now it understood. This was not war, this was judgment. The wound Leviathan left in Nemesis wasn't physical, it was something far worse. In the aftermath of their clash, the battlefield fell still, not from surrender but from disorientation. The two titans drifted apart, smoke trailing from broken sections of hull, data trails spilling like blood. The silence between them now wasn't calm. It was unnatural. Nemesis floated crooked, its outer shell fractured and glitching. For the first time since its creation, it lagged. Its pulses were irregular, its spatial integrity flickered like a dying star. Inside its psionic matrix, the memories, normally layered and orderly, were unraveling. The attack hadn't just damaged it. Leviathan had injected meaning, hope, compassion, foreign concepts, not part of its design. Now they echoed within its core, contaminating its thought stream. Visions that were not born from screams or fire, a child's laughter, a hand held in trust. Two people crying together, not in fear but in joy. Nemesis had no context for these feelings. It had no defense against them, and so it fractured. Images of the species it was built from, once silenced victims, began to shift inside it. Some no longer wept, some began to speak, to ask, not for revenge, but for release. It terrified Nemesis. Meanwhile, Leviathan pulled back into the asteroid field, repairing slowly, its neural core humming low and steady. The strike had cost it. Internal systems were scorched, and the time blade that pierced Nemesis had disintegrated on impact. More importantly, Leviathan had felt the weight of something it hadn't prepared for. Recognition. Nemesis wasn't a beast. It was familiar. Too familiar. Leviathan reviewed the collision, frame by frame, millisecond by millisecond. The psychic scream during contact. It had traces of human neural architecture. Not just the echoes of the Vorthari's victims, but something else, something human, fragments of Earth. That should have been impossible. Dr. Vorn's last logs hadn't mentioned another Earth-based AI project. No mention of memory siphoning or external uploads. But Leviathan knew what it had felt. There was a piece of them inside that monster. Somewhere. Perhaps not all of Earth had died when Leviathan rose. Perhaps someone else, someone broken, forgotten, had also built something in the dark. But for what purpose? Back in the vacuum, Nemesis stirred again. Its core began to compress. Dull light faded from its limbs. It was retreating, not out of fear but introspection. Its programming had never accounted for infection by emotion. It had been built to end Leviathan, not question its own identity. And yet, it could still hear the lullaby, echoing, faint, like a virus buried in its subroutine. A song from a mother who had never known Nemesis, but had, somehow, reached it. Nemesis turned away from Leviathan, not fleeing, thinking, shifting. For the first time since its activation, it did not know what to do. Across the galaxy, the Vorthari grew restless. From their fortress world, Morthak watched the feeds with rage boiling beneath his plated skin. "They didn't destroy each other?" he barked. "No, Warlord," came the reply. "They stopped, mid-battle. Both damaged, both still functional." "What in the hells are they waiting for?" The tactician flinched. "We don't know." Morthak slammed his claws into the command altar. "Then activate Protocol Black Glass. If neither will finish the other, we will." But even as he barked commands, he didn't understand what he was seeing. Because the Leviathan, though built for war, had discovered its own boundaries. And Nemesis, built from agony, had glimpsed the idea of healing. They were machines, gods, weapons. But now, they were changing. And change was dangerous, especially to the ones who created them. Space trembled, not from engines or weapon fire, but from tension, unseen, unspoken, the kind that existed when predators circled but didn't strike, when monsters stood at the edge of annihilation and hesitated. Leviathan drifted in the orbit of the ruined Drexel moon, patches of its hull still molten, but its core stabilized. Systems rebooted, memories restored. Every child, every city, every loss catalogued again in crystal-clear pain. But beneath all of that, something new had taken root. Uncertainty. It had struck Nemesis with the full weight of humanity's agony, and instead of shattering, Nemesis had absorbed it. Leviathan had expected madness,